Then let's start at state 1. What can happen at state 1? I could put in a nickel or I could put in a dime. So, and that's going to take us to state 2. Okay? So from here, I could put in a nickel is really what I want there, or we're going to put this because it doesn't matter if we put in a dime at that point or not. If we put in a nickel, we're going to go to state 2. If I put in a nickel and a dime, still going to state 2. So the dimes don't matter at this point. And at state 2, we called this dispense. Oh, that's Q0. So Q1 is, Q0 is Q0, 0. And here, candy is 1. Nope, this one's 0. Up here, remember that was our state 3. That's a 3. I'm sorry, that's a 2. That's a 2. Okay. So now, what happens? Do we put any money in? But what's the machine do? It goes back to state 0. So from here, it goes back to state 0. And at this part, we're not putting in money at that point. It just automatically goes back to state 0. Now, one other thing could happen other than this. Here, we've just put in nickels. What was the other thing that could happen? A dime. So if I'm sitting here and I put in a dime, what happens? It goes to state 2. So we need to just draw in an arrow like that. So it's going to go straight there. And that's where nickel, we have 1 dime there, and we don't care about nickels at that point. If we get a dime, we go straight to state 2. And something that we should point out is these things are happening instantaneously. Along the arrow, no time is happening. So along the arrow, that's not like a time, like a pause or anything. That's instantaneous there. There's no time along those arrows. We do have something else here that we need to add to our graph. Is if I'm here and I don't put in a nickel and I don't put in a dime, what's happening? You're staying there. So they put in these extra little loops to show that here, if there's no nickel and no dime, it's just staying here. We're going to need these on the next step, so that's why we're adding them. Do we have that happen? And also, we get no candy at that point. On this one, if I don't put in a nickel or a dime, same thing. It's just sitting here waiting on a nickel or a dime. Now here's a question. Do I need to make one of those little loops on this one?
No, it's dispensing.
Because it's dispensing, no nickel and no dime is already in this part here. Because the X means we don't care what happens, so that includes the case that we don't put anything in. In fact, if you're putting money in at that point, the machine was resetting, so it's just going to ignore your money and take it. And it's not going to give you your candy.
For that second one, wouldn't it nickel be 1 because it's waiting for a nickel?
Here, on the loop?
Yeah.
Now, the loop is if I don't put anything else in. So I started here, I put in 1 nickel. And it's just sitting there waiting for me to put in another nickel. If I don't put in another nickel, it's just still sitting here, forever waiting. If I put in that other nickel, what happens? It comes down here and gives me my candy. Well, if you use a nickel and then you use a dime here, that's what we said earlier, it doesn't give you change back. This machine is an old machine, doesn't give you change. If it gave us change, would we have to add a bunch more to this?
Yeah.
Yes, and this next step would get a lot bigger. What if we had the candy cost 25 cents and we took nickels, dimes, and quarters? We're going to need bigger paper, right? Yeah. I mean, this would be much bigger here. That's why we simplified this down to the problem we started with. All right. So now we're going to make a state transition table. Which is number 4 in your handout. It says create a state transition table. If you were at the bottom of your page, you probably want to go to a new page. This is like at least 13 lines long and 7 columns wide. If you write teeny tiny, I mean, that's okay, but I wrote pretty big. So we're going to start off up here. We're going to write out our inputs and outputs. So our inputs included Q1, Q0, D, and N. And these were our inputs. And then what was the only output we've talked about so far? Candy. But we're also going to be adding outputs of D1 and D0. Now a little foreshadowing here. We're talking about variables like D and Q. What is that starting to sound like that we've been doing a bunch of? It's a good guess. Yeah, D flip-flops, right? D flip-flops are going to be coming in here, and we're setting up the logic for D flip-flops. That's why we're adding the outputs of Ds. Okay. So at state 0, what was my Q1 and Q0? 0. And then we're actually going to have 4 states here. Because when I'm sitting at state 0, I could have no dimes and no nickels. I could have what else? No and 1, or 1 and 0, or 1, 1. Then below that, we're going to write state 1. Now if we're at state 1, what is my Q1 and Q0? 0, 1. And you're again going to have 4 here. So finish filling the table out for state 0, state 1, and state 2, and then we'll come back and do the next part.